So I wanna table a few things though, and see if we can like just run through some of these different like kind of almost like of if we took the story in like three pairs and kind of like or three areas and take it
You
through.
can't have three pairs.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, you can. I'm sorry.
No,
I
it's
thought you
fine.
meant three halves.
Dude, you
Anyway,
just
yeah, no,
cleared Brady, so I'm happy. It's great. Brady's
no,
innocent.
I'm not sure I did actually, but anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, you did, and anybody who said otherwise is totally lying because of resentment about the success of the Pats organization. Um, so, well, actually, let me just do these first before we get to that. Do you? Okay, so let's get rid of like the really, you know, just like night in the Monty Python movie, like the report hasn't been released yet, and that will show X and blah 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 blah. Which, by the way, I want to say the report absolutely, in my mind, should 100% be released, and we should, as like a
Of
matter
course.
of politics, demand that, and also fight back against how Trump is using this to sort of burnish his own authoritarian fantasies and grudges against the media for sure. But on the other hand, like, okay, I agree with you. I don't think that Barr wrote a summary that is like, oh well, if you drop every other comma, what it really is saying is Mueller is like, go to the national monument, and under that is the secret dossier that will reveal that Trump, got peed on, but it was in Bucharest, right? Like, there's the real stretches that people are doing on this, but there is the kind of broader like, do we necessarily take at face value? An attorney general who's obviously like a Republican operative who, essentially in his confirmation hearings was pretty much like, yeah, I'm not going to, I'm going to play with the team type of thing. What's the what's the balance between figuring out, not going to like conspiracy theories about how the real Mueller report, will still show us X, Y, Z. I think I mean, maybe it will, but I think that's incredibly far-fetched. Whereas on the other hand, getting into this other like weird position where we're just like, oh yeah, a Republican, authoritarian administration. I totally take the AG's word for it on like the potential, by the way, potential tons of crimes of the president, setting aside even just this stuff with like the collusion thing.
Well, right, but again, you don't have to infer anything.
Yeah.
You can look at the indictments that have been issued so far, and the undeniable fact that there aren't going to be any more from Mueller. So that tells us one thing to begin with. Then there's the second thing, which is that the two most important quoted sections in the summary spoke directly to the two biggest issues that everybody was worried about. The first one was collusion, and then, I've already quoted the line from that. The second one has to do with obstruction. And, Mueller did an interesting thing. He punted it back to Barr, and surely he must have known that meant the end of any obstruction cases when he did that, because,
Right.
But Barr has already essentially said he doesn't really, and someone insanely, he's already said something to the effect of he doesn't believe the president can really obstruct justice. But beyond that, Mueller wrote this thing that said the evidence does not establish that the president was involved in an underlying crime related to election interference, Russian election interference. So that speaks to the whole issue of, it's kind of like resisting arrest. Like, yeah, you can be, brought in for resisting arrest, but it's not lawful. That charge isn't lawful unless there is an underlying crime that was valid. So we have to weigh the issue of whether or not the obstruction thing, how meaningful it is, given the fact that Mueller couldn't find an underlying crime to sort of apply to the obstruction issue.
Right.
And, of course, I don't, I would, if this were just an internal Bill Barr investigation of Trump, of course you'd be right to be completely skeptical of anything that he would say. But the thing that speaks the loudest is the absence of arrests and indictments that would speak to a larger conspiracy. And then the other thing is just the quotes from the report. So, there might be, I'm sure there's all kinds of stuff in there that's going to be, probably devastating to Trump if and when it ever becomes public. But, it's not about this.
Right.
We can feel pretty safe in saying it's not about this.
Right. Do you think that if do you think that if out of the gate people said, what about Trump's relation? Because there's all these, the dude seems to me to be like an incredibly corrupt guy generally. If you said, well, there was the collusion with Israel to undermine the Obama resolution or abstain on the vote condemning settlements. I don't know if you call that collusion or whatever, but inappropriate work with a foreign government during the transition. There's all of these different relationships with these Emirati and Gulf money sources, Michael Flynn in Turkey. If people out of the gate, instead of turning it into like a Tom Clancy thing, made it like a oligarchy and influence peddling period thing, I mean, maybe I'm answering my own question, but would that have been more effective? But on the other hand, that's the type of thing where if you open it up like that, that means you could start threatening the entire modern political establishment.
Well, look, yeah, that's exactly the case. And in fact, when this whole business started, I went down to Washington and I spoke to an investigator on a senatorial committee who kind of laughed about the whole thing because they had, before Russiagate happened, they had been preparing a sort of big sweeping look at the Foreign Agents Registration Act, because it's an open secret in Washington that, Washington is basically Rome, and all the countries in the world come to Washington bearing tribute,
right,
in the hopes of getting, X, Y, and Z policy approved. And so there's just this incredible, roaring river of money that's coming from abroad that's flowing to politicians. And it's doing it through this, fairly well-established system of lobbyists and K Street lawyers. And if they had gone out in there with a sort of broader mandate to look at the entire spectrum of improper activity and foreign money influencing elections, they would have found all kinds of stuff. This actually was one of the reasons that I was so kind of down on the Russia story to begin with, because I don't doubt that Russia tries to influence America's elections. I would imagine they're thinking of trying every conceivable angle to do so. But everything that I've heard over the years, leading up to this incident, tells me that they're probably not even in the top 10 in
right,
terms of the countries that do this. And it's both parties, but probably more on the Republican side, I would say, actually, because a lot of it has to do with energy policy. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And if they had done it that way, it would have been more legitimate. But they couldn't do it that way for reasons that are kind of obvious, because that would have imperiled everybody in the current political establishment.
I mean, so power-wise, it's obvious, but psychologically, when you indict the media class in a way, or maybe I shouldn't use the word indict, but whatever. When you criticize the media class, do you think it's the psychological need of whether it's MSNBC or making Robert De Niro do Robert Mueller on Saturday Night Live, all this kind of embarrassing stuff, the need to not deal with the fact that, that we are Rome or whatever, that you can't just outsource all of your troubles to Trump, right? Or even on the other hand, when people say Russia with their social media campaigns, they exploited, racial divisions as an example. It's like, well, sure, because America is an incredibly racist country with a massive police violence problem, right? Like these things didn't
Yeah.
Putin didn't have the guy choke Eric Garner to death. Like what the fuck are you talking about?
Right. Yeah. You know, it's it's I think this whole story grew out of an earlier problem that the press had, which was the inability to take Trump seriously as a candidate. And it was sort of uniformly everybody dismissed even the idea that he could win even the nomination. You had people from the Washington Post talking about, Dana Milbank said, I'll eat my column if he wins the nomination. So he ended up having to do that, which was funny. But the reason they all thought that is because they're kind of out of touch with how people think about the sort of current status quo of the American political establishment. And it has so many flaws, and there are so many long-standing problems that have gone unaddressed, from job security to police abuse to environmental issues to if you go to any part of the country, there are places where there isn't a viable obstetrician, a birthing center, a place where women can have babies for hundreds of miles, and so the country has all these problems, and because of the way we cover campaigns, we just don't really look at this stuff, and so there's lots of discontent in the population that seems irrational when it's covered by the Washington and New York media, which isn't seeing all of this. So they come up with all these other explanations for what happened, and I think that was one of the reasons why the Russia explanation was so attractive, because there was no other way to account for what happened, in 2016. Whereas, there was a wide-ranging sort of movement that included the Sanders movement on the other side. Yep. That was really just about anger about stuff that was going on, and we got to look at all those things.
You've just watched a Michael Brooks show video, and you can watch all of our full main live shows every Tuesday night at around 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and subscribe to get all of the clips you want. We're covering the globe. We're focusing on international relations, the intellectual dark web. We're having fun. We're doing deep dives with a lot of amazing guests. Of course, become a patron for the whole thing at patreon.com/TMBS, or subscribe to this YouTube channel and help us keep growing and get that content out there. Subscribe below.